Hi, good morning. This is Bradley J from the Big 94.5 Country. We welcome to another edition of our StreamYard. And today we're going to be talking about the Envista Cares program. And they are partnered with the Kansas Book Festival. And I want to start by introducing Grace. So, Grace, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, you are welcome. It's lovely to talk to you. And I want to talk about just in case people haven't heard or don't know about what Invista Cares is. Talk a little bit about that and tell people what it is.
Yeah, so Envista Cares Challenge is our outreach program. It's one of the ways that we support nonprofits in our communities where we have our credit union branches, and it includes a 2,500 matching challenge grant. So we match every donation that the organizations receive up to $2,500, and then we have about a $12,000 marketing package, which this has worked so well with this organization since they also have a large event this month. So.
And speaking of event, for September, the Invista Cares focus is on the Kansas Book Festival. Now, Grace, can you introduce us to Tim?
Yes, Tim Bascom. He's the director of the Kansas Book Festival, and he's just popping on here. So, hey, Tim.
Yeah.
So, welcome, Tim. Tell us about the Kansas Book Festival and what it is.
Yeah, the Kansas Book Festival has been going for 11 years, and it's happening at Washburn University this year, September 24th, and that's a Saturday. We'll have 60 authors coming who are presenting in panels, talking on a whole range of different subjects. And we've got in that group a National Book Award finalist who you're going to get to hear from in a minute, I think. And also a New York Times bestseller, KJ Dell'Antonia, who has a book that's done really well about those chicken restaurants down in Pittsburgh, Kansas area. There's stuff on poetry, fiction, nonfiction, children's writing as well. And with the children's program this year, we're trying to do a bit more, and we even have a panel of kids who have published books who are going to be speaking. In the morning, people might want to bring their kids in and give them a chance to learn a little bit more about writing and publishing as well. There are 30 exhibitors too, coming from all over, including all the main regional presses here in Kansas. And there's food trucks. There's performers too. You can listen to rock music, to jazz, and we've got a group that does kind of folk music called the Church Ladies that people really enjoyed last year.
So, what's the mission or purpose of the Kansas Book Festival?
You know, we're just trying to help people realize how important reading is in our lives. You know, when we read, we tackle the important things in life. And we learn more. It's exciting to know more, and we're entertained, and that's important, particularly on days when you're not feeling like life is what you wish it was. Sometimes you're connecting with somebody who understands the world that you experience, and I think it's really important that authors actually get a chance to be with readers. That's a very, very satisfying experience, and we're trying to make that connection, particularly. Our mission is to get Kansas people together with Kansas authors. So these 60 authors all have some connection here, even if now they live in Florida. And we do have a number flying in from elsewhere, but they're writing about Kansas or they lived here as a kid. And it's fun to have that link happening.
So the Kansas Book Festival also supports libraries and literacy across the state. How does that work?
Oh, thanks for asking. That kind of flies under the radar, but it's a very important part of the festival. We try to help each year libraries at schools and also in communities around the state that might be struggling in certain ways. Maybe they don't have the money to update their books. They got kids still thinking that Len Dawson's the quarterback for the Chiefs. You know, that's not going to fly. We got to get something newer in there. Or we're trying to help with older folks who need books that are large print. And so we give grants each year up to $10,000 that goes out to particularly needy libraries around the state.
Well, how can the community support the mission that you have with the Kansas Book Festival?
One of the main things is please give to help out, particularly with that library initiative. We're wanting to do that as well as we can, and even to increase it if we can. And these libraries are in tremendous need. A lot of these schools are changing. They're becoming more diverse. They need books that speak to the kids who come from different cultural backgrounds. They need technology. We have somebody who writes and says, we've got a computer, one computer in our library in a small town in western Kansas, and that computer keeps crashing. We need a new computer. And in this day and age, that's pretty important.
Yes, it is. Well, you talked about how we're going to meet some authors, so introduce them to us.
I think we're going to hear from both Lucas Basire and Tracy Brimhall. Lucas is the National Book Award finalist with a book called Running Out that, am I getting the title right? I hope I am. That's looking at the aquifer in western Kansas, having lived there as a youth and actually experienced what's occurring there. And Tracy Brimhall is a professor at K-State with a number of books of poetry that have done really well, and she'll be talking with us as well.
Well, I'm going to start with Tracy because I didn't grow up. I lived 18 years in Manhattan, Kansas. I love that city. It's a great city to live in. And with you being teaching there, it's at K-State, which is a great school. Football season's underway, but we're talking about books. So Tracy, I want to ask you, why does a book festival matter for an author, or even a reader?
Well, the talk I'm giving at the book festival this year is actually about audience and who we're trying to connect with and why. I think intimacy matters to all people. Connection and community matters. And we can certainly create that by reading a poem and I feel close to dead people all the time. I read dead poets and I'm like, oh man, me and Emily Dickinson have the same heart. But of course, getting to have that intimate exchange, that's not one way. That's not reading and receiving somebody who wrote something, but to get to chat about those ideas, to connect, to share, to have that go back and forth in an equal way of a Q&A, of getting to shake a hand or give a hug if you see somebody that you've known from before. I think connection and community is a big piece of just being human. And I think books create a sense of intimacy when we're alone in our beds reading before bedtime, or reading to our kids, and that's great. But it's also really great to see the face of the person that you connected with and say something about that, and to sort of talk and connect face to face.
Because you're going to be at the Kansas Book Festival, right?
Yes.
Yes. And what does it mean to you when somebody comes up and wants to talk about books to you? They're like, oh, I read books, and they start talking to you. What do you tell them? How do you engage with them?
I just really love asking people questions. If somebody just wanted to tell me about what they loved, I just want to keep asking them more questions. I try and ask a new question every day, or write down a question. It's one of the ways my son and I journal together every night. Because we know that journaling is good for remembering parts of your day. I like to write down something from each of the 5 senses in my journal every day, and then I can reflect on my day and just kind of be present later. If I wasn't very present in the dog walk because I was cold, I can be present when I'm journaling about it. But we write down things we remember that we smelled, touched, felt of the day, as well as a question. Because my son once told me I wasn't a good conversationalist because I was quiet. So I try and write down and think of good new questions. So asking good questions is just a thing I think is a really good life habit and skill. And then also when my son encounters new people or has to tag along with me to whatever I'm doing, we practice questions that he can ask at that dinner party or that event. What can he ask, especially if he's seated with other adults? What can he ask them that will create a conversation? So I think books are a great way to share things that people love. I had students write metaphors for reading last year, and most often it came down to some sort of time and space travel through their imagination. but figuring out how people feel about reading, what they like to read, why they like that thing, and just getting to know somebody through their passions is a great way to connect with people, I think, as sharing what you love. And I imagine many or most or all people at the book festival will be people who like reading or are curious about doing more of it. So it'd be a good, easy connection point to ask more about one's love of reading and books.
Okay, well, when I do my show on the radio, I always like to ask my audience a big question. So my one big question to you is, if you had to tell people to read one book, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, that is a big one. Just one? Oh,
Just one.
So tricky. That is really tricky. Okay, so because I'm a poet, I have to promote another Kansas poet. Oh no, then which one? I was going to say our outgoing poet laureate of Kansas, Huascar Medina, has a new book that came out, I think, last year, Un Mango Grows in Kansas. But then if I'm also allowed to just promote another Kansas poet, Michael Kleber-Diggs will get the Hefner Heinz Book Award the Friday night before the Saturday Book Festival event. And I also would promote his book as well. It's a very beautiful book, obviously an award-winning book of a Kansas award for a Kansas writer. And they're both beautiful books. And I'm sure the booksellers there at the book festival would have copies of these great Kansas poets available.
I love the passion you have when you talk about books and poetry. It is amazing. And now I've set Lucas up for a big question. I want to bring Lucas on board and talk to him about the Kansas Book Festival. And one of the things, Lucas, I want to ask you is, what motivates you to participate in a book festival?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on here. I just want to first of all say it's such an honor to be part of the Kansas Book Festival. These are wonderful events. They're events for the whole community. They're events for having conversations and opportunities for having conversations that otherwise are often difficult to have. And they're places where you can really bring the stories that you're telling back to the places that those stories come from, and create something new together. So it's a really lovely opportunity, and I'm just so glad that it's happening.
And so you're going to get to do a presentation at the festival, correct?
Yeah, that's right. On Saturday at 2 p.m. in the Memorial Union, I'm in conversation with Scott Reynolds Nelson, who's the author of Oceans of Grain, which is a really terrific book that gives a kind of intellectual and environmental history of wheat and wheat production. And it's moderated by Steve Lerner, who many people will know.
So when you're at the book festival, what's the one thing you look forward to? Is this your first book festival? Have you done many? And if so, when you go to one, what's the one thing you really look forward to?
Yeah, this isn't my first one. I've had the opportunity last spring. I presented at Tucson and the Los Angeles Times Book Festival. They were lovely opportunities. And the thing I like most is having a conversation with audience members. I think that it really teaches me a lot. I always learn a lot from the questions. And, the greatest compliment that you can pay an author is to really engage their work. And many of us write these books, we put them out in the world. We don't really know how they touch down in people's lives. And to get any kind of feedback from that it's a real honor and it's a compliment.
What's the greatest thing you've ever heard about something you wrote in a book? Like when somebody's come up to you and they're like, this really touched me. Was there a moment for you like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been very blessed in that way. And every time I hear from somebody who comes from the worlds that I'm describing, they find something in it that's authentic, whether they agree or don't agree. I really appreciate that. And often it's the points of disagreement that really push me to think harder and to write differently and spur me to think about next projects.
Do you get a different feeling like when a kid comes up and maybe has read your book, or a young person? Do you get it? Does that make you, I don't know, is the feeling more than from an adult when a young person is influenced by your book?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, the book I'm writing about, the topic I'm writing about is so future oriented. Really, a lot of the stories that we're telling now aren't for people who are here reading. They're for people who are going to be reading 20 years from now or 50 years from now, people who are going to be taking those lessons and passing them on to the future. And I think that that's a real gift. That's a real power of writing. And it's one of the reasons that I think many writers try to get into this business.
All right. Now, I know you were thinking I forgot a big question, but I do have one for you, Lucas. And if you could write with another author, any alive or dead, who would it be?
You know, Bradley J., that is a good question. That's a hard question. And I'm not a big believer in singular answers to those kinds of questions. So I could imagine a collective endeavor bringing together a lot of people who've come at Kansas issues from different perspectives. And I think that a conversation across partisan and political divides is actually an important thing to do right now. And you could imagine very well the kinds of commentators that could be brought to that table.
I always like throwing it out there, man. It's just questions that are always on my mind when I meet people. And I'm always like, you're not going to get another chance to ask these questions that pop into your head. So you got to let them go, man.
Yeah, right on.
I want to thank Lucas and Tracy for giving us their insight and answering my big questions and talking about the Kansas Book Festival coming up. I want to bring Grace back on this. Well, everybody's back on the screen. Tracy, thank you. Lucas. Tim, is there anything you want to add about the Kansas Book Festival before we let you go?
Well, if you do come, and I sure hope people will, you might bring a new or used book and give it to a booth that's called Liberate Books Project. These are folks out of Hays, Kansas, who are trying to improve libraries in Kansas jails. And I think it's an important thing that they're doing. So you could bring a book and just donate it as a fun thing to do on the side as well.
And yeah. Grace, oh, go ahead, Tim.
Oh, please help us out if you can on this challenge that Envista is giving us. Up to $2,500. We'd love to have you match it by donating, and you can do that. She may talk more about it, but just even going to our website for the Kansas Book Festival, there's a place there. If you hit support and hit donating, it's pretty easy to do, or to just mail in a check.
And Grace, I guess we'll wrap up the show with you. Tell us where people can help. Like, they can't go to the Kansas Book Festival, but they want to help with the challenge with the Envista Cares. How can they do that?
Absolutely. We match any donation that the Kansas Book Festival receives in the month of September. And so easiest way, go to envistacares.com, donate right there. If you're more of a check person, send them a check, cash. We match anything. We want to see them succeed. They have just an amazing impact on our community and state. So.
Well, I love doing these StreamYard videos and getting to learn a little bit more about what's going on in Topeka and from people in the area. So Tracy, again, Lucas, thank you guys so much. Tim, thank you. And Grace, we're going to get the word out for this Envista Cares for the Kansas Book Festival. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Bradley J., and that's our StreamYard.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.